Today, I want the topic that I'm going to be focusing on, at least initially, is the question, what is a sexual shaman? What is a sexual shaman? Now that's a term, sexual shaman is a term. I did not coin the term, although I don't know who, I don't know where I heard it, if I ever heard it. I just made it up one day, but then I looked up, and of course someone had said it before I had said it. It's very easy to say the word sexual shaman. But the context for this, before I characterize what I mean by that, which will be drawing in from the previous lectures, which I will review some of the information pieces in the previous lectures. The context for even coming up with this term was I was very much, felt like my life was very much about the reintegration of spirituality and sexuality. I had grown up in a Southern Baptist cultural background in the southern part of the United States, which, like much of Christianity and much of many other religions, looked at sexuality as something that is, if not antithetical, at least an obstacle to spiritual growth. And that did not seem right, accurate, or it didn't seem accurate to say it that way, to think of it that way. So I kept thinking about this, and I would talk to people and say, oh, my life is about the reintegration of spirituality and sexuality. And it was like it would go in one ear and out the other, like no one was registering. I thought, this is so obvious. Why isn't everyone upset about this, concerned about this? And so one day I came up with the idea that if we take the stories of people who are involved in spirituality and sexuality and put it into a book, that I might be able to convey what I was really, the tone, the concern, the questions that I had. So I came up with this idea, a book that evolved into what is now called Women of the Light, subtitled The New Sacred Prostitute. And it could have been about women and men, but it was more obvious to talk about women, and it felt like. And so I invited 9 women that I knew fairly well, to write their stories. And what they were involved in, they were doing hands-on somatic approaches to sexuality. And they were also very aware, very conscious of their spiritual or path or spiritual consciousness. And so they wrote their stories. They wrote their own stories. I introduced each person. And I was wondering, what do I title the book? When I asked them what had they read, what had inspired them to even do the work that they were doing, several of them mentioned the name of the book, The Sacred Prostitute, by Nancy Qualls Corbett, who was a Jungian psychologist. And so I read the book, and then it came to the idea, well, why don't I subtitle the book, The New Sacred Prostitute? Because these particular women, and I knew men as well in a similar role, including myself, that there were contemporary people doing sort of similar types of things to what was being depicted in some of these writings of ancient cultures. And the main term in the literature has been sacred prostitute, not the only term. So I use the word sacred prostitute. And I would often say the word sacred prostitute. And eventually about, I don't know, maybe it was 8 years later, I decided to do a documentary and decided to call it The Sacred Prostitute. And as we were presenting this term to people who were going to be in the documentary, people said, oh, it's about Mary Magdalene, or this or that. But what I was really finding was a lot of, it's almost like I had to say, it's the sacred prostitute, but not the way you think of prostitute. And I wanted to find a term that more accurately conveyed the idea of what I was really understanding or starting to understand and to talk about. And one day I came up with the term sexual shaman, because somehow that just felt just really right on, that what I was really talking about was something like a shaman who related to sexuality in some way. And so I started to use that term, and eventually the third documentary in the series of book documentary, and then the third documentary is entitled Path to the Sexual Shaman. So I want to convey today what I mean by sexual shaman. First, let me also indicate that I do make some differentiation between this conceptualization of a sex worker or prostitute and what I'm calling sexual shaman. That is not to put down people who are sex workers or who would call themselves prostitutes. Now, often this is interpreted as, well, this is superior, you're calling this superior, you think other people's inferior. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an approach that generally sex work is about fantasy fulfillment. Entertainment, fantasy fulfillment. And that's totally fine. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about the sacred prostitute or the sexual shaman, I'm talking about transformation. And one could be doing entertaining fantasy fulfillment and be involved in transformation. However, my experience and my observation is that when, as a practitioner, whatever our role might be, if we relate to the person or the class to do what they want to do, to act out their fantasies, to act out what they think they want, that may not be what would serve them the most in terms of their deep growth, their energetic development. And so as a practitioner or a teacher, I consider it's my role to get a sense of the person, and that if they want me to be involved in the relating to them, then my role is to try to see what it really supports them the most. Because often people's fantasies are at their surface. And when you look at transformation, you're usually looking at something much deeper that a person, adding one more person to the group, adding two more people to the group. One more second here. Welcome. I'm about 10 minutes into the concept, so we just sort of have to figure out what I said because it's too complex to repeat. And I forgot the point I was making right now. So, anyway, the idea here is that to be involved in a person's transformation usually means going deeper than being relating in a way that they think is what they want. So, anyway, I often see this fantasy fulfillment versus transformation almost as a versus. It's really hard to mix the two, not that it's not possible, but I think real depth of transformation is supporting a person going beyond where he or she thinks they may want to be. Anyway, that's a point of view I have. And so I found using the term sexual shaman as a way to start emphasizing this other point of view. And because it's not a term that's very popular or used a lot, I get a chance to define it in the way that I would think would be best, given I'm using the term. So here's how I think of a sexual shaman. If you watch my little video commentary on Vimeo, maybe it's on YouTube also, I don't remember if I put it there or not. I have a commentary called What is a Shaman? So there I define a shaman. I want to briefly redefine that, because for me, a sexual shaman is a person who is a shaman and there's some additional factors. To understand my perspective of shaman, we have to understand the concept of what I refer to as dimensions. Because, from my point of view, one of the main differentiations between a regular person and a shaman is that most people are functioning only in one dimension basically all the time. Shamans, for me personally to consider someone a shaman, they need to be functioning in more than one dimension. And that's where they live. That's how they do their everyday activities. And so, let me briefly characterize the concept of dimensions, which I talked about in the last lecture. I'll try to say it more succinctly and much more briefly here. A dimension is a range of frequencies from lower to higher. From lower to higher frequencies. This is a very low frequency. Muscle and bone, very low. In my perspective, as I've come to understand, that there are 20 dimensions. Each of these other dimensions, I consider this lower range of frequencies that you and I are talking in, looking at each other in, and it's basically what I call the first dimension. The second dimension is a higher range of frequencies. Third dimension is a even higher range of frequencies. Fourth, even higher, and 20th is even higher. And that I would say 98% of the population, at least on this planet, is functioning only in one dimension. Now, we can use meditative techniques, different types of energetic ceremonies, or some of the shamanic things such as take ayahuasca, which I'm not advising, I'm simply saying that when we do some of these other types of activities, we begin to access these other dimensions. But as soon as we're out of the meditation, as soon as the ayahuasca is worn off, then we're back functioning in the first dimension only. A shaman lives, breathes, eats, farts, everything in all these different dimensions. He or she is not doing anything because they have developed certain energetic structures that enable him or her to be vibrating at these higher frequencies 24/7. And you may have heard me mention before the documentary called The Horse Boy. I highly recommend it. In that this autistic child is taken by his parents to Mongolia. The child is from Texas in the United States. They take him to Mongolia and to receive some healing ceremonies, perhaps to help the child with his autistic situation. That's the whole reason for going there. And at the beginning of that documentary, there are 8 or 9 shamans who do things that look very shamanic, very much traditionally shamanic. And they have some impact on the parents and the child in terms of my reading of the energies based on what I saw in the documentary. But near the end of the documentary of The Horse Boy, they meet with another shaman in northern Mongolia who is a kick-ass shaman. This guy, he's in his 70s, he's functioning in all 20 dimensions. The shamans at the beginning were functioning in the first 4 dimensions, from my reading of their energies. But the shaman at the end is all 20 dimensions. And that child goes through some major, major changes, improvements in his behavior, just from being with that shaman basically one evening, one morning. And I had this understanding or theory, that the more dimensions we function in, the more impact we can have in this incarnated dimension, this dense matter dimension of muscle and bone. By the way, air is in this dimension that's not so dense as muscle and bone, but it's still in the first dimension. Chakras, even though they're subtle energies, they're still first dimension, when we are incarnated, that is. So a lot of subtle energies are also here, but the real heavy-duty bone and muscle are very much first dimensional ideas. Or ideas to understand what the first dimension is about. So the more dimensions we actually function in, not just access temporarily while in ceremony, but actually function in because we've developed certain energetic structures, the more impact we can have, because, see, everything in this dimension has, in a sense, and I say this very loosely, in a sense, a second dimension version, and a third dimension version, and a fourth dimension version, and a fifth dimension, and up to all the way to the 20th dimension versions. When we go to a physician, a psychotherapist, or even a Reiki practitioner or acupuncturist, their methodologies are only, assuming that that practitioner is not developed also as a shaman, the way I define a shaman in a moment, that practitioner is really doing things only in the first dimension. Heart surgery, replacing a heart, is very, very physical. Reiki and acupuncture are very, very subtle, but they're still first dimension activities. What happened in the documentary, The Horse Boy, is that the shaman, who was so highly developed, was actually it's not, I'm going to say it one way, but that's not the accurate way of saying it, but to make more sense. He was actually doing things in all 20 dimensions, which were then available to that child's energetics to transform itself, for the child to transform his own self. And so the more dimensions we function in, my observation is the more impact we can have in this first dimension. Because we think about transformation and healing is perhaps the main role that we often think of that a shaman is involved in. That's not the only role or function of a shaman, but that's how we generally think of shamans, is that way. I'm going to come to how this relates to sexuality in a little bit. But first I'm trying to characterize a shaman. So, for me to define someone as a shaman, personally, when I read their energies, first they have to be functioning in the first 4 dimensions. That fourth dimension I would call energy. All energy originates in that dimension. And if you want to be involved in transformation, you have to have higher octane gas. If you want to drive your car across town, well, 80 octane gas, at least in the United States, will do it. But if you want to go to Mars, it ain't going to do it. You got to really put much more oomph into the process. And so when a person has developed their structure sufficiently so they're able to function in that fourth dimension, they are accessing energy or intensity directly. A lot more is available to a person. So they can, in a sense, accomplish more for the impact in this first dimension. So, for me, a shaman has to be functioning in the first 4 dimensions. Secondly, they have to develop a structure that I call the double, or the controller, like an air traffic controller, so that even when they're asleep, this other structure that I call the double is like noticing what is happening with energies around and throughout this person, this shaman. And it's like autopilot, making adjustments to this and that. And so that when we're doing ceremony, we're usually doing something where we're consciously focusing our awareness, observing the breath, doing something, a kata in the martial arts. It's a very focused awareness. Once you develop this other structure, you can be asleep and it's functioning. Not as completely as being very consciously focused, but still very extensively focused on keeping things balanced, keeping things, dealing with incoming energy, so to speak. And so for me to define a person as a shaman, they have to also develop this double. A third factor is that for me to define a person as a shaman, they have to develop structures whereby they're able to process what is in the third and the fourth dimensions. I'm not going to take the time right now, but I define the third dimension as the wisdom dimension. In a sense, these are vibrational patterns that we can work with. And once we start to function in the third and fourth dimensions, we have access to a lot more goodies. But if we're not able to process them in a way that we're able then to utilize it in the first dimension, it's just there, but we can't utilize it. So we develop energetic structures that enables us to process what's in the third and fourth dimensions. When a person has done that, they're functioning that way, I would then label them as shaman, even though they may not look like, act like a traditional shaman, like the shamans in that documentary, The Horse Boy. In a contemporary society, it's a very, very different culture that you and I live in compared to where that culture is, for that really kick-ass shaman in Northern Mongolia. It was a nomadic reindeer culture. They herded reindeer as nomads, or some sort of nomadic type of existence. So they were often on the move. A small group, I don't know if there were 50 or 100 people in that particular, quote, tribe or whatever they would be called. But that's very, very different than, I don't know, is it 300 million people in the United States now? It's a whole different cultural context. So that when you're out there, the shaman becomes the midwife, the bone setter, the marriage counselor, the healer of cancer. Some shamans do lots of different things, and they don't have a hospital when you have an emergency room. Well, you'd send out to the hospital and you get a heart transplant or something like that. It's a very, very different cultural context. So in the modern world, we can have people who are energetically developed in a way that are the same as traditional shamans, but the roles they play can be very, very different. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to Rachmaninoff playing, I forget which concerto it is, but it's just like, I don't know, for 30 minutes, I mean, it just blows me away. I mean, as a kid, I could play dan, 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 da, dan, da, dan, da, dan, 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 2 fingers, 1 finger. But here, 10 fingers, 30 minutes going up and down the piano. It's unbelievable. I thought, I wonder if this guy's a shaman. And I started looking on the internet, found some pictures. I even found a video clip, which I can't find anymore, of him playing the piano. I said, yep, he's got the energetic development of a shaman. Carl Jung, the psychologist. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. The Dalai Lama. Einstein. All these people fit my energetic definition of a shaman, but their role does not look like what we think of as traditional shamans. And I really think that as contemporary people, if we find ourselves drawn to a shamanic path, that if all we do is simply emulate traditional people's cultures, we're missing the point. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I've found being in traditional Native American ceremonies to be highly meaningful for me. If you look behind me here, you see sundown ceremony shields and a sacred pipe and a crystal skull and all sorts of things that are basically based on different cultural traditions of the pre-European peoples of North America. But I did not grow up in a Native American culture. Genetically, I might be a teeny bit, but that's not important if I am or I'm not. But the point is that my lifestyle, here I am on Skype, lecturing away very intellectually, is very, very different. That doesn't mean that it's not, developing these structures that people who are traditional shamans develop are incredibly beneficial. We could call it energetic development. We could also call it spiritual development. I mean, you look in the high Tibetan lamas, they are fucking awesome. Reading the energies of the Karmapa, there are two Karmapas now, one approved by the Chinese and another one. If you look on, the Karmapa is the head of a different lineage than the Dalai Lama in the Tibetan Buddhism. And there's two images of the Karmapa. One is a narrow face, one has a more rounded face. The one in the narrow face, well, both are very, very highly developed from my reading of the energies, but one with the narrow face is incredibly developed. Well, they don't look like shamans, they don't act like shamans, and given what my image of shamans are like, such as looking at the documentary The Horse Boy, but energetically, they are incredibly developed with the same types of structures that traditional shamans have developed. And a lot of the same types of functions, although they express them differently and culturally. So, a shaman is someone who fits this because they are functioning energetically in certain ways that the average person is not. Okay, so that's the idea of a shaman. So, sexual shaman. Well, let's not call this, some people might think, well, that's blasphemy. What do you mean, sexual shaman? Well, I stepped into the path that I'm on mainly by going to the field of human sexuality. My original academic training was in sociology. I left that in 1968, I thought, and to do my hippie trip. Yeah, groovy, man, put out your thumb, Mexico, California, you have an old lady, which is, a lover. You should beat up your van. I had it all. I picked apples and pears in Washington State, picked fir tree cones in Oregon, planted trees in Idaho, just in the van. I was nomadic, living out in a hippie van. And then ended up in San Francisco in 1973 and went to massage school. So I had this academic background, but I felt like massage was a great thing and it was culturally approved. And so it was a whole new thing opening up in the hippie days of 1968 and later, at least in California. And I really felt that the field of massage was really, really limited in that anything that looks like genitals, sexual feelings, sexual arousal, that was inappropriate, illegal, unethical. And I can understand the concern, but something kept saying, I go to massage class, and when I go home with my girlfriend or lover or whomever, well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to try some of those massage techniques in areas they didn't teach in massage school. I mean, surely other people do that other than me. In fact, if you want to be a good lover, I recommend taking a massage, at least certain types of massage. Some other types of massage are terrible. But I learned Essence style massage, long flowing strokes. And, well, if you want to be a better lover, learn to do some long flowing strokes. You may remember the song, I want a man with a slow hand, doesn't come and go in a heated rush. And so I think if I were ever to teach Lovemaking 101, half of the class would be about learning long flowing massage strokes. Because being present with touch is really important, because you learn to be present with the person. You learn to touch in a way that you are like tasting their skin. So anyway, as I was doing massage, I felt that, and professionally, I thought, well, sometimes sexual feelings would come up. That doesn't mean I acted on them, but that would come up. And so to be in denial about this, in many professions in body work are really in denial about this. So when a professional training says, sexuality, sex is bad, don't go there in your massage, in your practices, in what you're doing. Well, guess how it comes out? It comes out, boom, not really thought through, and comes out in often dysfunctional or inappropriate ways. So I really think people who learn to do hands-on, whether it be chiropractic, Reiki, or whatever, as long as you're touching on a human being, or as a psychologist, that it really is important for the people to have information and experience around relating to sexuality. Because there is a question of appropriateness, absolutely. But to be in denial and say, oh, I never feel sexual feelings in massage, well then you aren't doing a very good massage from my point of view. If you've never had sexual feelings giving a massage, then either, well, you're probably unconscious or lying to yourself. And it may not be the case, but gee, having the experience, the feeling come up is one thing. Acting on it in an inappropriate way for the context is another thing. So anyway, I started teaching a class entitled Erotic Massage. Later I called it Tantric Massage, where I included the genitals as a part of the body. And I taught this for twosomes, couples of all sexual orientations. And so to deal with this energy that was coming up, when you start doing genital massage, often people have lots of feelings, energy, intensification coming up. And so I had to come to terms with how to relate to this intensity. And that was really my stepping into the concept of Tantra. Relating to this intensity of energy and being very present, being very conscious of it, and learning there are ways to dance with it other than necessarily the usual ways of fucking and sucking. And there is nothing wrong with fucking and sucking. It's rather wonderful. But there are other ways to relate to sexuality, genitals, and sexual feelings. And at least the way Tantra has been evolving in the West, at least in the 1970s and 1980s, in the San Francisco area, which is where I was living for a number of years, I began to really realize that what I was really relating to was not sexuality, but energy, intensity of energy. So this kept developing, and I was studying with Tibetan Lama, metaphysical approaches, I was studying Western sexology, all at the same time. Teaching and studying in all these areas. And what I began to realize is that often a shamanic path was taking me deeper into an experience of energy than any other type of path that I had found. And that eventually evolved into the concept of a sexual shaman. So, if I take my concept of shaman that I just described, functioning at least in the first 4 dimensions, having a autopilot or double, and having energy processors for taking advantage of what's in the 3rd and 4th dimensions, then what makes it different? How's a sexual shaman different? First, I like to look at, there are 3 areas where sexuality and being a shaman overlap. And actually, rather than the word sexual shaman, I really should be saying orgasmic shaman. But it doesn't capture the imagination the same way. So sex does not necessarily result in orgasm. And we can have something that I call orgasm, such as energetic orgasms or some type of mystical experiences that are in a non-sexual context, so they don't look like sexuality. But if you think of the concept of orgasm in a general sense, that when we have an orgasm, whether it be sexual orgasm, energetic orgasm, mystical orgasm, and another person is in proximity, as in with a lover, there are 3 things, as been my observation, that occur quite naturally, quite spontaneously during the moment or moments of orgasm, that are what a highly developed shaman is doing to have the impact that he or she has. One of the things that happens in orgasm is we bring in more energy. Remember, I'm without going into a whole lot of detail in this lecture, I also have a, I think I mentioned, on Vimeo I have a documentary or commentary called What is a Shaman? So I explain this in much more detail. But one of the things that happens in orgasm is we bring in more energy from that 4th dimension where it all originates into this 1st dimension that is available to us. And I'm not referring to candy bar, carbohydrate, sugar energy. That's a different concept of energy. It's probably closer to some of the ideas when people talk about prana or chi. And even those are too limited from my point of view, and I don't even use those terms. So when we have an orgasm, we bring in more energy. I said, well, Ray, why does that guy roll over and fall asleep all the time? Well, I'm not talking about energy in that way. I'm talking about energy in a different way. And some women may roll over and fall asleep too, but we have this stereotypical idea that all men just roll over and fall asleep after they get their rocks off. Well, and biologically, the system is saying, we need more sperm. The species must survive. That's one thing. There are other ideas of energy that enable us to function in certain ways, to function interdimensionally. And you don't get those from candy bars. One of the main ways to get them is an orgasm. So we manifest more energy within us. Shamans do the same thing because they develop certain energetic structures that enable them to just bring in more energy, just because they have these structures functioning. It's the same type of phenomena as what we have in orgasm. The difference is that they're accomplishing it a different way. But we're bringing in more energy. And I'm oversimplifying this I can do in much more detail, but we would never get through this in the talk I'm giving today. We'll never get through it. So, number one is we bring in more energy. That's what happens in orgasm. That's what shamans do, to be able to do what they do. But that's not the defining characteristic of a sexual shaman. The next two characteristics that are two things that happen during orgasm are what I would consider the two factors that make a shaman a sexual shaman. We'll be doing it at the end of today's session, or the last hour, an energetic merging ceremony, which is what we did at the end of the last session. We'll be doing it again. It's a very powerful, I think, meditative technique. And I call it merging, energetic merging. Now, a lot of people may use that word merging, but they're not necessarily referring to what I'm referring to. Merging is when one of our structures vibrates at the frequencies and intensities patterns, or the energetic patterns of another person. We perceive the other person's patterns of energetic vibration, and then we begin to vibrate within ourselves in the same way. When we do that, and again I'm keeping this simple, we are in effect merging with that person. In this case, especially when we're in their energetic field and within a few feet of them. So we have contact, and then we replicate their vibratory energetic pattern. Now, as I presented in the last lecture, this is not the same idea as being an empath. Generally, when people refer to themselves as an empath, my observation is that they do go into the other person's vibratory energetic pattern, but they drop their own. In other words, the other person's pattern replaces their own pattern. So suddenly they have the headache just like the other person. This is very different. What I'm talking about is merging. Merging is I keep my own patterns and I add on your patterns too. So it's not replacing my own, but it's adding on. So we have some commonality here. I'm vibrating in your energetic patterns, therefore we are merged. For a shaman to do transformation the way that I think of transformation, a shaman first has to merge with the person or persons in the ceremony. He or she, as a shaman, has to start vibrating in the same energetic patterns. And then, once we do that, my toolkit or abilities, my knowledge base, my intensities of energy are combined with your abilities or toolkit, with your knowledge base, with your intensities of energy. And so you both have access to a greater context to then facilitate the transformational process. And without merging, this won't happen. What this means is the shaman is not doing something to the other person, although the shaman may be doing certain things to the person. I mean, like a chiropractor makes a click in the spine, say. Well, that is doing to the person. But the energetics that I'm talking about is something in addition to that, so that there is a shared now context that the person can then transform his or herself, because they have more tools available to them, more intensities of energy. So that's a very important distinction, which is not the main distinction I'm going into right now. But shamanic transformation occurs mainly because of what the shaman brings to the context, not so much what he or she does to the client or the person in the healing ceremony. The merging process is essential. I used to assume that when someone merges, they merge many different ways. Then I began to look more closely and traditional shamans that I know here in the American Southwest, Native American people, but also with the help of YouTube and Vimeo, lots of films of people being shamans, doing what they're doing from around the world, and documentaries such as The Horse Boy. And I began to realize a lot of people who are shamans, that they merge, but they only merge partially with the other person. And so there may be a facilitation of transformation in one part or one energetic structure of the other person, but not a full transformation because all the other parts aren't being supported in transformation at the same time. The main way that most fourth dimension shamans merge is with something I call the light body, which is very intense energetics. And often the person, when they're merged, will feel zzz. I'm oversimplifying it, of course. When we have what we call energetic orgasms, that is a light body orgasm. What I'm referring to is a light body. That's my own particular definition and characterization. So most shamans are merging only with the light body, which is also the body that does a lot of the healing. But what happens in orgasm, and we're made up of 20 energetic structures, actually 21 I'm just beginning to understand, potentially, but basically inherently we're made up of 20 energetic structures, that four of these structures are like the movers and the shakers. I call them the physical body, energetic structure, light body, energetic structure, spirit body, energetic structure, and soul body, energetic structure. Other people might use the word physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, but I find those terms too limiting. So I use the word physical body, light body, spirit body, soul body. Again, that's just my terminology. It's not important what to call them. It is important, but it's not critical. That what happens in orgasm, if you have an orgasm and a person is with you, you're going to merge, my observation, all four of those bodies at once, all four of those energetic structures at once. So here's where the concept of sexual merging, sexual energetic merging comes in. That happens very naturally in orgasm, just for a moment. But remember, this same type of phenomenon of merging, from my point of view, is essential for a shaman to be effective in facilitating the transformation of another person or people in a group ceremony. Most shamans, like the beginning of the Horse Boy, they were functioning, the shamans at the beginning of the Horse Boy documentary, they were functioning in only one way. They were merging in only one way. I think all of them were doing a light body merging. The shaman at the end was merging all four of those bodies at once, plus more. So I do not consider a person a sexual shaman until they're a shaman who can merge with all four of those structures, because that is what happens naturally in orgasmic state, assuming we're with another person. And the more ways we merge, as well as the more dimensions we're functioning in, the more impact we're going to have. Psychologists work with the mental, or what I would call the spirit body primarily. Reiki practitioners, acupuncturists work mainly with the light body. Massage practitioners typically work with just the physical body, energetic structure. If you go to a monastery and go on retreat, well, they're probably a combination of the spirit body and what I call the soul body. So they're functioning in certain structures. But my observation is if you want to have more impact as a practitioner of any kind, if you're going to be functioning interdimensionally, you want to ideally be developed so that you're functioning all four ways. Therefore, sexual shaman. So you can merge all four. And ideally even more. At least those all four ways. Because those four energetic structures, or those four bodies as I refer to them as, are the movers and the shakers. So a sexual shaman is someone who is a shaman by my definition and can merge all four ways. There aren't that many shamans that I've read the energies of that can merge all four ways. That doesn't mean they're not doing good things. Doesn't mean they don't have good intent. It just means that they have not developed their structures extensively enough to be able to merge all four ways. And that's why I think looking at the documentary The Horse Boy is so important, at least from my point of view, because they show shamans merging with only one way, and a shaman at the end merging many different ways. And from my point of view, clearly the shaman at the end had way, way, way more impact than the shamans at the beginning. Well, you can look at it and we say, well, who knows what? Well, I've just developed some abilities to read energies theoretically. And what I clearly observing, watching that documentary several times, clearly from my point of view, that incredible transformational things that took place were primarily by far, what took place between that shaman at the very, very end and the autistic child. But that's just my reading, and that may not be ultimate truth. But it supports my perspective that I had before I saw the documentary. So, the second factor necessary for a person, for me to call a person a sexual shaman, that's a similarity between shaman and orgasm. At least in English, we would sometimes use the word that a person knows another person, meaning they slept with them, meaning they had sex with them. Sort of the biblical language of whenever the St. James, I think the St. James version of the Bible is translated into English. I mean, when the St. James translation of the Bible into English. And so, to know someone, you had a good time, you get to know them. Well, what happens at the moment of orgasm is it's like we get a snapshot of the vibration, all the vibrational patterns, as far as I know, all the vibrational patterns of the other person. And so we have a vibratory knowing. We may not have a conceptual knowing about who, what, when, and where. Are they telling the truth? Am I really the one they love? Do they really love me tonight? Or will you still be here tomorrow morning? I don't know about the conceptual part, but vibrationally, when you have an orgasm with a person, your energetic structures have a snapshot of what that other person is like vibrationally, the vibratory patterns. And as far as I know, that is with you across lifetimes. Because some of these energetic structures, if you take the perspective of reincarnation, some of these energetic structures continue on incarnation after incarnation after incarnation. So the, quote, recording is there. So sometimes for fun, I look at the question, have this other person I've been a lover in a past lifetime? Or something like that. And sometimes I answer yes. And the way that would be recognized is that because at some level, my being, is the term I use, which existed in previous incarnations, had, at the moment of orgasm, a knowing of this other being's vibratory patterns. It may have been a one-night stand, it may have been 50 years of companionship. But with that moment of orgasm, there is a knowingness. And if you want to, from a shamanic point of view, if you want to facilitate transformation, you have to know what in the world is happening over there with this other person. You can look at external symptoms, which are important to look at, important to know. But traditionally, shamans are people who work with these subtle, interdimensional aspects of another person. The transformation is taking place in more than one dimension, which does not usually really happen with most psychotherapists and physicians, Reiki practitioners, acupuncturists, or massage practitioners. Not that it's not meaningful, not that it doesn't feel good, but it is not happening, my reading of energies, really at these other dimensions level. And remember, we are made up of we are in more than one dimension. We exist in more than one dimension. And the deeper, so to speak, or the higher we can be functioning, the more and deeper transformation. So that this autistic child who used to have temper tantrums all the time suddenly stops his temper tantrums and he starts to talk more with adults. I mean, overnight it's just amazing. Not that the child is still not autistic, which is actually a benefit to some people, but our general cultural patterns don't comprehend autisticness. And again, I'm using the word autistic because they use the word autistic. I don't know what the child is. I don't diagnose people as such or not. I wouldn't know how to diagnose as such or not. But that's the label that was presented, so I related to that label. And if you want to facilitate another person in transformation from an energetic point of view and from an interdimensionally energetic point of view, you have to know what the hell is going on over there. If a person's had a heart attack, you don't start taking out their appendix. Well, something's wrong in there. Let's just go in there and carve it up and take it out and see if that works. Oh, that didn't work. It died. Okay. So I'm being facetious here. But the point is, if you want to be effective, at some level you have to have a knowingness. It doesn't mean you have to conceptualize it or have a thought of what it is, but energetically your being knows, in a sense, what is happening over there. That happens, my observation, is naturally when we have an orgasm and another person is in an energetic field. Like I said, you don't know if they're lying to you, if you're the only one or not. Or you just assume that you're not, or you will not be sometime in the future. I mean, the different games we play in courtship. But this knowingness is essential to be an effective facilitator of transformation in another person. And it might come through, like the film of the 1960s, Through a Glass Darkly. Some vague sense, some vague hunch. Oh, I need to put my hand there. We need to look at this factor. And it may come across as intuition, but it's because we vibrationally have a knowingness, although it may not be cognitive, of what is happening to the other person. We can develop certain energetic structures that enable us to do that. But it happens naturally when we have an orgasm with a person. So, a sexual shaman is someone who, one, is a shaman by my definition, and most contemporary people who call themselves shamans are not shamans by that definition, so maybe my definition is too narrow. But when I look at traditional shamans, a lot of those people fit that definition, and most contemporary people calling themselves shamans do not fit that definition. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're not doing meaningful things, important things. But one, given if someone fits my criteria of a shaman. Two, they are able to merge with another person all four ways rather than just one way, as an orgasm. And they're able to have a full knowingness of the vibratory pattern of the other person because they're at some level perceiving it. may not have a clear idea of what's going on, but their being knows it vibrationally. Then that's the other factor, to have this full knowingness of the vibratory patterns of the person. So, what I began to realize from my initial use of the word sexual shaman, I would use the term to find a term that would get past people's limited point of view of certain terminologies. So I use the word sexual shaman to refer to these pretty awesome people that I've started to understand and meet, and that for many of us on this path of involved with sexuality, whether it be tantra or some other name, and that's not important, whatever you want to call it, that if we can develop ourselves to function interdimensionally, and we can merge all four ways at once, and that's what we'll be practicing doing at the end of this session today. And if we can come to have a knowingness, which happens when we have an orgasm with a person, then we have developed important abilities for our own development and transformation and supporting others. So basically, a sexual shaman is a usually more developed shaman than a person who first fits my definition of shaman. Some other points here. So this is my evolution. And so I now use the word sexual shaman to refer to people who say, well, where's the sex? Where's the sex? Well, when I first started doing this merging, when I started to teach people some things that I was in my own energetic development and spiritual growth, I started to teach the exercise, energetic ceremony that we'll be doing in a little bit. And when I first started doing it, I would sometimes have these energetic orgasms. And it would feel incredibly intimate. Sort of like what happened, even though we were not doing sex, we weren't touching each other, we weren't even being erotic with each other when I first started teaching this to people. And yet, it felt like that, almost like the intimacy, energetic intimacy, that one might experience after having had an orgasm. Some of you don't roll over and fall asleep. Or you're not just smoking a cigarette, but still being present there. Do whatever you want to do after you have an orgasm. I'm not saying one thing is superior to the other. I'm simply saying smoking a cigarette or rolling over and falling asleep may not be the same experience as what I'm referring to. But the feeling I was having, the experience I was having in this just merging was very intimate, like I was inside them. But there was no physical, quote, penetration, unquote. But there was an energetic similarity, I now later came to understand. So that in a sense, it is like making love. And I know some practitioners who've been trained, you're not supposed to trespass on other people's energies. You're not supposed to be inside them energetically. And I sort of laugh and say, but that's what shamans are doing. And we're so uptight about being energetically intimate with someone, we're throwing away some of our most effective tools. So it's more about embracing it, becoming at home with it and say, oh, wow, this is neat, this feels yummy, and just enjoying it and being one with it. And in fact, to start acting on it some erotic way, behaviorally, would probably take away from the experience. Because it's often there in the stillness that you really, really deeply feel. That's why, a lot of different traditions are doing very still meditation. You're also going to have chaotic meditation and have very powerful experiences too. But when you do this energetic ceremony, we'll be doing it a little bit, if you feel something that seems like intimacy to the person, Great. That's what's supposed to happen. Because when you merge, you are vibrating like the other person to some extent, if you are doing what I'm calling merging. And you can do that with a tree. You can do that with your cat. I'm going to tell you, do it with a crystal, it might take you on a trip. Woo! Those crystals are the best lovers. Woo! I'm talking about, like rubies and amethyst, those type of things. Woohoo! But I wouldn't call it erotic, but it sure feels like a yummy trip. This is my own personal experience. Or go to a power spot. That is a real power spot. I know Machu Picchu is one of the ones you think of, and of course Stonehenge can be another one. The first time I went to Sedona, I'd heard about all these great energetics, and I got there, and I was very familiar with energy in terms of doing massage and body work and teaching erotic massage. I got there and say, well, this is very beautiful, but where's the big fucking deal energetically? I came back about 3 years later. In the meantime, I'd started more on a shamanic path where I started relating to the earth energies, not just human body energies. And with these earth energies, I become, ooh, I can feel energy, I can feel this. The second time I went back to Sedona, this place that a lot of people, one of the New Age meccas, at least it's only 4 hours north of where I live, at least where I live now, that, wow, I was walking through energy fields. I could feel these energy walls. I walk through it, turn around and come back. Yeah, there's a wall of energy there. Yeah, there's a wall of energy there. As we develop these energetic structures that enable us to perceive, to merge, to intensify, to bring in more energy, we're able to have a different type of experience than the average person. I'm guessing 90% people on the planet are functioning in only one dimension, and they've not developed or barely developed any of these structures that enable us to be what we can be. Okay, there we go. So, a sexual shaman. There's my characterization. Anyone have any questions, comments? And you say, oh, Ray, that's bullshit. I think it's interesting bullshit. And it's something to consider, but don't believe it. Just sort of like, okay, that's Ray's point of view. And let me say one other thing here too. I forgot to say this part. I talk about merging. Merging is not when people, what's the word I used? I forgot, space the term out. Empath. It's not an empath, because usually empaths, when people say they're empaths or read their energies, they just take on other people's energies, replacing their own temporarily. The other is another one called what we call hooking or cording, where a person attaches to the energy. It's called vampire, sexual vampire, regular vampire, and extracts or sucks energy. That is not merging. I want to be very, very, very clear. That is not merging. The process of merging does not extract energy from the other person. Not what I'm referring to as merging. Rather, it likely to enhance the other person's energy as well as our own. So see, when we have an orgasm and we merge with another person, not only do I get energy 100%, the other person gets 100%. It's not like 50-50. This is my understanding. It is 100% for me and 100% for you. Because the other person gets the energy too. When you're merged, one person increases energy, the other person is available to them as well. So, you want to say merging is not an empathic replacement, nor is it energy sucking or cording. Okay, let's open up to questions. Remember, you need to turn on your microphone if you want to say something. Questions, comments, explorations, reflections. Yes?
I have a question. How this merging is related to different type of orgasms and also different levels of orgasm, and also is merging not happening when one person is have orgasm? What is happening then, like when only one person have orgasm?
Yeah. First of all, maybe you turn your mic off because I'm hearing an echo. If you want to say something, turn it back on. This does not require people having multiple mutual orgasm. If you and I are together, I have an orgasm, you get the energy too. You have an orgasm, I get the energy too. Now, sensation-wise and pleasure, we have it at the same time. We're all over the place. So that's a nice sensation. Orgasm, I'm referring to orgasm from an energetic point of view rather than the physiological or even pleasurable point of view. So it makes no difference whether you have mutual or not. Well, I don't know if you double your pleasure, you double your energy, you're both having orgasm at the same time. Maybe, I don't know. I haven't thought about that question. I'm not sure. Well, again, I talk about the physical body, energetic structure, light body, spirit body, and soul body. I think my understanding at this point is that if we have a soul body orgasm, we're bringing in more energy than if we have a physical body and a sexual orgasm. It may not feel the same, but there's technically more energy that I'm talking about coming in. I don't know if that makes any difference in a practical moment, in a practical sense. Because if you really want to have lots of energy coming in, you've got to go beyond having those orgasms in the way that I just talked about, that we think about orgasm. There are other ways we get a lot more energy, but you have to develop these energetic structures for functioning interdimensionally. The Dalai Lama could be very celibate. I don't know if he'd ever have any orgasms or not, in the usual way I'm talking about orgasm. But because he's so energetically developed, as well as the Karmapa, that just the very act of meditating will probably bring in more energy than any orgasm will ever, the way we think of orgasm, ever bring in. Probably. But for the average person who's not very energetically developed, orgasm is one of the main ways we get more of this type of energy. So it's like a way to prime the pump, so that embracing our sexuality rather than denying our sexuality or treating sexuality as evil, embracing our sexuality is a way to bring in the resources so that it's easier to develop myself energetically and spiritually. And what's been happening in the tantric and new age sexualities, sacred sexuality arena in the last 20 years or so, there's been a lot of focus on what I'm calling the light body and the breathing orgasm. You go, boom. I mean, many different teachers are teaching this in different ways. Or you're placing your hand over a person's body, and so they have the writhing. Most of the things that people are teaching as Tantra, at least in the classes that I've been experiencing here, I don't know about traditional Tantra. I'm just talking about what's been happening in the United States. Most of that has been focusing on the light body. Most in Western sexology has been focusing on what I call the physical body. Together they're great. So there's some differences there, but they all can result in orgasm. The spirit body orgasm is so subtle, most people would probably miss it. But I've talked to a number of people who have had soul body orgasms, and rather mystical experiences, sometimes when they're having sex, or they're just walking down the street and suddenly they're in this state. And I'm not talking about trance now, although they might have a trance-like effect, but it's not like, well, it could be, because when we go into orgasmic state, things often are different. So I think it will vary, but I'm not sure which one. But eventually, you want to get to the place where you're developing structure so that the very act of intending in ceremony will be bringing in more of this energy. At least that's my point of view. But we have to develop the structures to do that. And that's what shamans do. to become a shaman to function in the first dimension, you've had to do that, is my observation. Did that answer your question, or most of it?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. Anyone else here? We'll probably go for another, maybe another 10 minutes or so, and then take a break, and then come back for to do the energetic part. Or Tara, if you have any recommendations, we can modify. But anyone else? Any questions, reflections, experiences you want to share? Did it make sense? I hope it was more systematically presented than the way I presented last lecture. I was trying to find my feet there, trying to get that describing dimensions in a very context outside of what I was referring to. So anyway, anyone? Yes.
It's me again.
That's fine.
Is it the sacred prostitutes? They are sort of shamans who are using their sexuality for the healing purposes and so on. Are they?
Yes, I understand. Here's how I suspect. Again, and I'll call it ancient cultures, where there were males and men and women. Of course, we hear much more about the women who became temple priestesses or priests, and somehow these religions were more what we might call a fertility religion. They embraced sexuality, in contrast to the approaches that we see now that, say, in Christianity and Islam, it appears, and more or less in Judaism. I mean, I'm not that familiar with all the world religions. And most Buddhists are not really into embracing sexuality unless they're into tantric Buddhism, and that these contexts where the practitioner, priestess, or priest would step into and perhaps be trained for years. I suspect that what they were becoming were what I call a shaman. And they did ceremonies which may or may not be like the example given, the hypothetical example given in Nancy Qualls Corbett's book, where the warrior comes back from war, he goes to the temple, he spends the day with the priestess, she bathes him, feeds him, nurtures him, talks with him, makes love with him, and the warrior comes out of that cleansed from the psychological wounds of war, so that he's all ready to rejoin society. That's basically the imagery that I was getting. I haven't read it for quite a while, but that's the concept. Well, I seriously doubt one day with any priestess is going to take away the wounds of war, or the psychological, as I talked about in last lecture, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is really bad. I doubt if any one day with any type of practitioner is going to change it. But I suspect that before the temple priestess became simply a way for the temple to make more money, because it sure seems like that was, when I read some accounts, it's really, they were instead of selling cookies, they were selling sex. It feels sort of like that, or maybe that's the point of view of the Herodotus, the Greek historian, 500 BC, something like that. He went into Babylonia, I think it was, and observed these religions where all females had to serve some time in the temple to be available sexually to worshippers, who then would contribute to the temple. and therefore they would be freed of their obligation to serving the priest, serving the goddess. That's basically the story that was being presented there, and I think that probably the story is superficial and rather sexual, because, as I'm talking about now, you can be a sexual shaman, never touch a person's genitals, not have any sort of sexual arousal, and still be doing what is taking place in orgasm, which are important factors in facilitating transformation in a person. And soothing touch is very important, in addition to just the energetics. So I begin to think that the imagery that I was reading in contemporary 20th, 21st century literature, writings, revisions of history, there was some, or I would say revision, different versions of what was going on, but coming from a 21st, 20th century person, may be rather limited from our perspective of what sexuality and spirituality are. And I suspect that in other cultures, where people did not grow up with this separation between spirit and sexuality, spirit and the body, but where the fertility religions embrace sexuality, that's why they call it fertility religions, where they have the Eros Gamos type idea, Hierosgamos, I think it's pronounced Eros Gamos, that where the king and the high priestess would have ceremonial sex to encourage the gods, the deities, the goddesses to be benevolent, for the crops to grow and their animals to be prolific, as a way of getting the attention of the deities so that life would be better. And then some other writings where now everybody in the tribe or the community went out there in the field and started fucking too. So it was orgy night, totally approved by the culture and the priests and the priestesses. And so I'm not sure how accurate a reading we get other than through the lenses of our contemporary points of view. But suddenly I realized that what I understood as a shaman, this is what these people probably were, and how genitally focused or orgasmically focused they may have been really variable. May not have been quite what we think they were. I mean, the temple dancers who were there, usually women for the pleasure of the rich men, and that's not inherently wrong. I'm not trying to put down men and temple dancers. But again, it started to look like that fantasy fulfillment model, which is not real transformation, from my point of view. If a person just gets their fantasies fulfilled, they probably didn't grow that much. They may have a lot of satisfaction and feel good. But since your course, this training that you're involved in, is about being able to go deeper into facilitating people's growth, I'm suggesting that simply asking what are your fantasies and then helping them to have them might be rather limited if that's the only thing you're doing. That's the point of view I have. And hopefully, if I were to go to a practitioner, that he or she would know some sort of body work or some sort of herb for me to take that makes my life feel better when I don't feel good, or when it's not really working well. Because if I already knew how to do it, I wouldn't be going to see them. So I go to practitioners because they might have knowledge and abilities that I don't have. And I try to get them myself as much as possible. So I think the historical view of what the sacred prostitute was may have been limited. And I think that sexuality is much more embraced and didn't have the same taboo and negativity associated with it as we come to it in our own culture. And we're not going to know very much until we have more practitioners out there, and we have a legal system that enables people to do this in a legal way. I'm thinking about in terms of the United States and the laws against touching people's genitals unless you're a doctor or a nurse or something like that. I don't know about the situation in different places in Europe where you all come from primarily, but it's pretty fucked up here in the United States. And until we know and have a freedom to explore, because, you know, I started teaching erotic massage in 1975. That's almost 40 years ago. I don't know what the fuck I was doing, but I felt I had to do it. And unfortunately in San Francisco, they weren't going to bust my ass and put me in jail because there was such wide open times in San Francisco at that time. So I started stepping into the path. 40 years later now, I look back and say, that's how I began on this path. And no one told me I couldn't do it. Some people told me I shouldn't do it. But I kept listening inside, and I kept, learning and making mistakes. And this is not working. How do I make it better? How do I make this better? Whom do I study with? What do I study? How do I practice to find? It went deeper and deeper and deeper in energetics, and while partly because of my quadriplegic situation, I'm not sexually active in most ways people think of it, but I'm an energetic slut. I mean, it's quite possible to merge with power spots and crystals and human beings, and it's yummy, and it's not necessarily erotic from my point of view, but that's, because I was limited with my physicality, I had to look at alternatives and say, ooh, it's a pretty nice alternatives that I might not have paid attention to if I had all the full sensations and full mobilities. So I guess making lemonade out of a lemon, as they call it in English.
Great that you found the way.
Pardon?
Great that you found the way.
Well, I found a way for me, and I'm sharing it with you. I hear a point of view. And it's good, and in some ways I'm thankful for this condition, but I wish I could have gotten here the same way in a different context. It would have been much nicer. Well, I don't know what it would have been like. All right, thank you. Tara, anything else you want to go into before we take a break here? I don't know.
It seems Tara is in another room.
That's all right. That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah. I think, how long would be the break?
How about 20 minutes to come back at the top of the hour? I'm not sure what hour that is for you all. I might find it here pretty quickly, though. All right. Anything else you want to go into before? Anything you want to go into before we take a break?
Yes, that would be fine. 20 minutes?
About 20 minutes at the top of the hour, whatever that hour is there.
I'm sorry, I'm doing some different things, preparing for the weekend.
That's okay. So 2 o'clock might...
Yeah.
So
20 minutes. All right.
And we'll come back and then we'll focus on energetics, but I won't record that part.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, babe. See you later.
Should we everyone just stay on Skype and I come back, or should we, or just everybody call back in 20 minutes?
Well, stay on Skype. Maybe that's more convenient because otherwise it takes time, yeah?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to turn my sound off and mute my mic, but yeah. So I'll see you back at the top of the hour, whatever hour that is for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Bye-bye.